Hey, what's up, y'all? Good evening. It's John McLaughlin, the governor, coming to y'all with another video. Tonight, we're going to talk about why economics is the solution that we need. Um, this video is basically stemming from a conversation I had on Facebook with a good friend of mine, my sister that I've known for, you know, many years now, who I used to know professionally and became friends with. And on one of my posts, she was asking, how economics um, solves our problems, and she wasn't fully bought in to that idea, that philosophy. And this is basically just an attempt to broaden that discussion to a broader public. Like I said, she's somebody I consider, a good friend of mine. So it's nothing, towards her personally. This is just opening that discussion up, and trying to get my thoughts out to more people on why I do believe that economics is the solution. Um, and I'm gonna start just laying some foundation. Booker T. Washington, who is one of my favorite black leaders that we've had in this country. He said that, I'm paraphrasing, but that economic independence is the foundation of political independence, and he said that back in the late 1800s. And I would agree with that. And that was basically his whole platform, was that African Americans have to build an economic base from which to have power, and that we can't necessarily have power without that economic base. Um, Another brother named Corey Camp, who's with a group called By the Hood. They have a video series, I think maybe a podcast series, but you should check them out. They're on Facebook, called By the Hood. But he had a great quote, I think last week or so, where he said social problems, all the things that we think of, again I'm paraphrasing, but all the things that we think of as social problems are really economic problems with social consequences. And I think that really hits the nail on the head right there. The things we perceive as social issues are really economic issues that just bear themselves out in society, in the social sphere. Um, and I think the reason we need to really focus on economics is that is where the basis of power comes from. Going back to Booker T. Washington, he gave a speech at the Atlanta International Exposition in 1895. Um, it's often referred to as the Atlanta Compromise, um, but it's a famous speech he gave. And in there, he made a comment about how we wanted to start, after we got our freedom, we wanted to start at the top and not the bottom. Um, and what he meant by that, he was saying that, immediately after slavery ended, we were going for Congress, seats in Congress, and we were, um, making these stump speeches, what he called them, which I would probably describe as like the precursors to, the protests and the social movements and the civil rights and things like that. These stump speeches on racial issues and such, and trying to get Senate seats and such, as opposed to focusing on the bottom, which is building our community base, our economic base. So buying real estate is something he mentioned, and starting our own farms and things of that nature. Um, and I think you can see that bear out today even. I mean, we had a black president. We've gotten to the point where we've had a black president, but socially speaking and economically speaking, not much has really changed for us, despite that. Um, so there's only so much that can do without an economic power base. Um, and I think that's something that we really need to focus on. And I think there was a time when we did that, before integration. A lot of people will point out Tulsa, Black Wall Street, for example, as the main example. And they say, well, we did that. We did build our own communities, and look what happened. They came and they attacked us. And that is, that's true. There obviously was the massacre in Tulsa. Um, but I mentioned this on the post I was talking about that kind of spurred this discussion. And people leave out half of that story in the fact that Black Wall Street was rebuilt after those riots. Okay, they rebuilt the community, and they continue to exist as a thriving black community up until basically the civil rights movement, when black people just wanted to be integrated. They wanted to shop at the white stores and eat at the white restaurants and live in integrated neighborhoods. So it wasn't the riots that ended Black Wall Street. It was our desire for that acceptance and that desire for integration. Um, and me personally, like, I am not like one of these super segregationist type of black people that think we should just totally go our own way. But I do think that we have to focus on our own economic basis. We have to build our own resources, because you cannot basically really negotiate with other groups of people without a power base. Okay, as Malcolm X had a quote. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but power never steps back except in the face of other power. So, we've had the civil rights movement, we've had up to Black Lives Matter, and all these other movements, and all this other effort and energy we've put into these kind of big social issues, but they never really get addressed. And I believe that's because we are not coming from a position of equity. So Mr. T always says, we need to focus on our own economics, build up our economic base, and then once you have an economic base, that is when you can approach other groups and get your rights and your equal footing, because you're coming from a position of equity. Going back to the Black Wall Street, and how it was rebuilt, I think number one, that shows you that they were able to rebuild it, because they had wealth. If they didn't have their own wealth, they would have been out of luck, and they would have, I don't know what would have happened, but they wouldn't have been able to rebuild that neighborhood. And not only did they rebuild it in the face of strong opposition. The white residents of Tulsa tried to prevent them through different laws and ordinances to keep them from rebuilding it, but they were able to do that because they had wealth. As the saying goes, money talks and bullshit walks. So it was their wealth that enabled them to rebuild that community. And then second thing there is kind of tying it back towards today with these, the protests and looting and rioting and stuff that is happening now. Mr. Tompkins said, I think last week, something about how destroying businesses and property is not how it doesn't destroy wealth. You're not destroying their wealth. You're not really hurting them. Those companies, those places, they're going to get insurance money. They'll make a decision whether or not to rebuild. Some of them won't rebuild, and they won't really take a hit for it. But the people that work there will, which will include some black people. They'll be out of jobs. And then if you think about it in the modern sense, brick and mortar retail is kind of an endangered species. So I mean, things are really moving away from that anyway. So they're going to collect their insurance money, and they're going to keep it moving. I think a good example of what we need to try to do is in the Asian community. And I've said this on one of my posts recently, because the wealthiest group of people, the wealthiest demographic in the United States is actually not even white people, is Asian Americans or Asians. They're the wealthiest group in America. And if you kind of study them, they don't really mix up too much in stuff. They don't really, you don't really ever see any big Asian political movements or social movements. You don't really hear them making a bunch of noise. They just kind of keep to themselves for the most part. They have their own communities. They focus on themselves and they interact with themselves. You know, you have those Chinatowns where everything is in Chinese. You know, they have connections with with businesses in their homeland, and the money circulates between the overseas and here, and everything is kind of self-contained. Um, so I think that is kind of how we need to look to try to do things. Um, and then going, further into, what does that look like? How does the economics help these situations? Um, you know, my friend who I was saying I had this discussion with on my Facebook post, she shared a story about her son who goes to private school. And then the school, I guess, recently got in trouble for racist type of comments or some type of racial stuff that was going on there. Basically, a lot of racial incidents were happening. And she was saying, well, how would black wealth address that? And my answer was, black wealth addresses that because if we had black wealth, we could build our own elite private schools, and you wouldn't have to send him to a racist institution to get a decent education. The reason he's going to that school, I'm sure, is because you want him to get the best education. And unfortunately, in the majority of our neighborhoods, the public options are usually substandard. So in order for him to get a good education, you're sending him to this school because that's where he's going to get at least a decent education, even if it's not necessarily, the best social environment for him. So if we had our own wealth, we could build our own schools, and employ our own teachers that are going to treat our children with respect. You could look at things like the health disparities, and for instance, how black women are, I think it's 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. Those types of things. How could economics address that? Where are the black hospitals? Where are the black medical facilities? If we had wealth, we could build our own medical facilities, employ our own black doctors, our own black medical health professionals who treat our people with respect. And then my friend also made, a point about, well, what about, a lot of our communities, we have people that really can't focus on generational wealth because they're just trying to survive and they're waiting on their TANF or their food stamps or whatever the case may be. And I get that, that's definitely a valid point. But I'm not under any illusion that, personally, I don't really believe in that illusion where I think there's ever going to be a time where everybody is at the same level, where everybody just has equal resources and equal opportunities. So that's not to say to leave those people behind, but there are a lot of black people that do have the resources to invest in themselves and to focus on building their wealth. And those people can build their wealth and they can create a better environment for those other people. We can build our own social service institutions, our own mental health facilities, our own facilities to help with the homeless, those types of things that help lift those people up. So do I think that every single black person is going to be able to, get in the markets and become wealthy? No, I don't really, and that's not necessarily my goal. My goal is to save myself and help as many other people come up as possible, and then each one reach one. She works in a facility that deals with homelessness, and she was like, do you think I really believe that we're going to end homelessness? And I was like, I hope not, because you're not going to end homelessness. And we laughed, but you might help one person escape homelessness. You might help 2 people escape homelessness. And it's the same kind of idea. I don't expect every single black person in America to get financially free through the Abakuas, but I do think, we've already got, dozens of people that are free. We've got hundreds of, or if not thousands of people that are in the group and working towards getting free, and that just continues to spread. So, I don't have any type of savior type complex where I think I'm going to solve poverty for every black person in the world, or where I think I'm going to eliminate racism. The way that, in my opinion, you deal with racists is to not have to deal with racist people or racist institutions. You build your own. You're not gonna erase racism. You're not gonna erase people's hate. You're not gonna legislate that away. And personally, I don't even really think that it's natural. Like all lions don't get along. If one lion comes into another lion pride's territory, they're not gonna be friendly. There's going to be a fight, and one of them's going to die. So in the end, what I think is that there are many of us that do have the opportunity and the resources to lift ourselves up. I mentioned this in my last video, where there are many of us that have the chance to lift ourselves up, our family. When you lift up your family, you automatically lift up your community. When you lift up your community, you automatically lift up your society. And so it's a each one teach one type of thing, where I lift myself up, or somebody helps lift me up. The Abakuas, Mr. Tompkins, Sharika, who brought me into the Abakuas, they have helped me get on track to lift myself up. I have my team who I am trying to teach and help lift them up. They're going to have their own families and their own friends who they reach, and they try to teach how to lift them and help lift them up. And it spreads like that until we can control our own communities. If you have black wealth, look at gentrification. If we had black wealth, we could gentrify our own neighborhoods. We could buy the hood. We could be the ones buying up these properties, fixing them up, being more equitable with the people that do live in the community. Whereas instead of having outsiders come in and, basically move everybody out of the community, we could buy the community and we could set it up in a way that, helps the people that are in the community on the lower economic scale. We could build our businesses. We can employ people in our own businesses. We can support other people, when you have wealth. Not only can you support yourself, you can support other people. Everybody's always talking about the black business, and that is definitely key. You can help support other people in their endeavors. And that goes back to my last video when I was talking about spending power. And I want to clarify that I'm not really saying that spending power is irrelevant. Spending power is not irrelevant, but the real point was that the point I was making in the last video is that spending power is money that you've already spent, and in our case, it's not money that we spend mostly with each other. It's money that leaves our hands pretty much immediately. Going back to Tulsa, the dollar in Tulsa, the black dollar, would circulate in that community. I believe it was like 30 to 90 times before it would ever exit the community. It would circulate for a year before it ever exited the community. And so, that's just my thoughts on the subject. Obviously, feel free to chime in with your own thoughts to add to the discussion if you like. I would love to hear from you. But, that's my explanation of why I do believe economics is the solution. Every part of society has an economic basis, education, health, even religion. Your church is asking you for 10% every week. Even religion has an economic basis. So really, economics is what ties a society together. The whole kind of concept of a society comes from an economic point of view. So, let's get together, man. Let's teach each other. Let's help each other, and let's get this economic basis going, because whether you like it or not, economics is a solution. So that's what we do here at the Abakuas. We're here to help you secure your economic future and independence, and then you can go out and teach and help other people get their economic independence. So if you want to learn more about our group or how to get started in the process, definitely hit me up. Thank y'all for watching. like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the video if you can, and I'll talk to y'all again soon. Bless up.